Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Delighted today to be joined by Diane Whirl, who's the Marketing Insights Director at Springboard Research. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Simon. Good to see you.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. It's been strange times. Things are looking up, so we're going to do this podcast in a positive, upbeat way. That's my ambition for this one. We're going to look at all things footfall, what things we're predicting moving forward in terms of footfall, shopping centres, regional shopping centres, how that's going to affect retailers primarily and those hospitality brands. And then we're going to cast our minds a bit further forward to think about Christmas, Black Friday, if it happens this year, and Cyber Monday. So before we jump into the detail, Dan, it'd be good if you can just give a review of your career to date and how you landed at Springboard doing the Marketing and Insights Director role.
Yes, of course. Happy to, Simon. So I won't tell you how old I am, but I will tell you that I've been involved in retail consultancy, retail research, retail metrics for over 30 years. And I actually come from a retail background. My parents owned an independent fashion boutique business in North London. And I grew up working in retail, so it was my home, really. I did a business degree in London and then went into retail property consultancy. Whilst I was there, I did a master's in property investment and then left that property consultancy and went to work for what was Sears Retail Group at the time, which actually sold most of its brands out to Arcadia. I moved quickly on to Experian, worked again back in retail consultancy, and then met my now co-founder of Springboard, Steve Booth, and we started Springboard back in 2002. And here I am.
Started at the coalface and now you're kind of through doing the data and the insights behind it. And in terms of Springboard, for those that don't know about the company, because you're kind of one of those hidden gems if you're not familiar with the industry, what kind of things do you guys get involved in?
So Springboard's a small business. We're about 30 people in total. We've been incorporated since 2002, and our whole reason for existence is about evaluating the performance of bricks and mortar retail stores and destinations. Our main core services are automated footfall counting. So that's putting little automated counters in stores and in destinations and tracking footfall either for owners or for operators. And also collecting sales data, really any metric that helps us understand how bricks and mortar retail is performing. And so over the years, we've collected a huge amount of data. And so in 2009, we were able to start publishing our indexes. And we're very delighted to see that now they've been adopted by media and now the government as the key metric for understanding what's happening out there in bricks and mortar retail.
Excellent. And people, when they see your profile, will publish a link to your LinkedIn profile when the pod goes out. They'll recognise you. You're always on TV. When we chat, I always say I've seen you at kind of 8 o'clock in the morning in the middle of Northampton looking wide awake and at it while all these bleary-eyed people walk past you going to work. So people will recognise you, I'm sure.
Yeah, we get a lot of media coverage. It's good. And I mean, the media really like what we provide because it's about hard evidence of what's happening in retail. And was lacking for a long time. But what we're able to do is deliver that. And it's also dynamic. So the data is coming in every day. We actually collect footfall data by hour, 24/7. So we've got right up to the minute data.
So it's a hot topic at the moment. There's a lot of debate about what normal is going to look like. There's phrases, the new normal's been bandied around. It's kind of gone away a little bit at the moment. I don't even know if there ever is going to be a normal moving forward. And certainly retailers have been through that journey of sales moving into the online channel. If they had an online channel, some didn't, and clearly that was a challenge for them. So in terms of the data that you've started to look at and see when retail, especially, and hospitality more recently have opened back up, what's that kind of telling you, and what kind of things are you starting to predict about how footfall will move and change going forward?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating, Simon, actually. When we went into lockdown, footfall plunged to and dropped by 80% from last year. I mean, huge drop. I mean, prior to that, we were looking at annual drops in any 1 month of about 1.5%, maybe 2%, and we were worried that that was pretty significant. In February this year, we saw drops of 2.5%, 3%, and we were concerned. But, when you hit a drop of 80%, it all pales into insignificance. And that was in the depths of the lockdown. And over the period of the lockdown, we've seen an uptick in footfall, even before retail reopened in June. And retail parks, so we look at 3 destination types: high streets, shopping centres and retail parks. Retail parks were the most resilient, clearly because the majority have large food stores on them, but also they have homeware stores and they opened earlier. And so when retail opened back in mid-June, we saw footfall increase in the week of retail reopening by about 45% in our high streets, slightly less in shopping centres and even less in retail parks, funnily enough, but they'd seen a big uptick before. I think people had got a bit fed up and bored with retail parks. So we saw this great fillip of activity, which was great, which was very encouraging. However, since beyond that first week, the increases started to tail off a bit and get back to single-digit increases week on week. Then hospitality opened beginning of July, and this is in England and Northern Ireland. And of course, it hadn't opened in Scotland and Wales. And we saw a further sort of increase from the week before of about 20%. So we're now sitting at around about 42% lower than last year in terms of overall footfall. In retail parks, footfall's 20% lower than last year. So retail parks are still the more resilient because clearly we have to go and shop and for food, but high streets and shopping centres at or around about 42, 43% lower than last year. So a big gap to make up from where we stood in 2019, but better than we were at minus 80%.
And it's interesting because if I cast my mind forward and think if lockdown had have been later in the year, I don't know how we'd have coped in some of those, I suppose, easing off periods where there was queues outside Sports Direct, TK Maxx, Primark and all the other classed as non-essential places that open, because the weather was lovely in that week that it came back. And I just cast my mind forward and think if that had been November, December, and it had been howling with rain and cold and dark, would people have still have had the appetite to get back out, or actually would it have just continued to plateau?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think this is what we saw comparing the retail reopening with the hospitality reopening. Yes, they're different formats, but, the week of retail reopening, as you said, Simon, the weather was just glorious. So people really didn't mind standing outside shops waiting to queue to get in. The weekend that hospitality reopened, the weather wasn't quite as good. It wasn't pouring with rain, but it was cooler and not as easy to stand outside. And certainly, not the type of weather you would naturally sit in a pub garden in. And that, I think, impacted the increases we saw that weekend. So whether we've become almost more weather sensitive than we ever were. Everyone goes drones on about, retail and weather, but it's absolutely true because we have such more of a choice how we buy our products. We don't have to go shopping. We are so much more weather sensitive, and because we now have to queue, that is heightened even more now. So the weather will definitely continue to play a major part in how retail performs.
So we're well below normal time figures, if you like, and even with the reopening, those figures, I assume, because people are worried about the effects of being out still, or you've still got people that are potentially vulnerable, and actually stores are limited capacity. This is going to have a massive impact on us as customers, shoppers, but also on those retail and hospitality companies. Have you got any views on the impact? I know we've seen over recent weeks, Boots Restaurant Group have closed some stores jointly. There's talk of Pizza Express losing a lot of stores. And I'm sure there's more to come as furlough dips down and potentially we get past Christmas.
Yes, I mean, I think hospitality needs people. It's, notwithstanding the fact that some people order online and get it delivered, which is still a very small proportion of food and beverage orders. Food and beverage largely relies on visits to destinations. And if you've got half the amount of people visiting destinations than you had last year, we know there's a very close correlation between footfall and sales. In retail, it's 78%. Hospitality, it's more than that. So you're inevitably going to sales are going to be lower. It's just simple economics. So we've seen the impact, as you mentioned, on a number of eat-in formats, but there's also chains like Pret a Manger have recognised that things are not going to be as they were. And, of course, Pret a Manger are in those areas where there's a huge working population. And realistically, until the working population go back into offices to at least some degree, food and beverage is going to be really compromised. Yes, we have country pubs and we have pubs outside town centres, but the majority of our eating and drinking venues are within high streets and to a lesser extent shopping centres, but certainly high streets. So high streets aren't attracting nearly as many shoppers, then those venues won't be.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Pret opened a shop in Shrewsbury less than 18 months ago, spent quite a bit of time fitting it out because it was a kind of difficult building, and that's one that's not reopening. So it shows that even 12 months ago, 18 months ago, in terms of their strategy for growth and new shops has been massively impacted because they're starting to close some of those in the, whatever the numbers were, 30, 60 that were never reopening. And I think the other bit that's interesting, even those retailers that were perceived to have had a buoyant time in lockdown, Halfords being one, again have said there's some stores that are now on the list to close. So even those that are doing well are still looking at the portfolio and thinking, we can't make these work.
Absolutely, because, retail sales, despite the growth in online, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in a minute, relies predominantly on people walking through the door. And it's interesting with the cycle market because they are at the behest of their supply chain. And there has been lots of talk around the limited supply available now that the initial stocks have been sold of bikes. And actually, once people buy bikes, because they bought bikes during lockdown and the sales went up enormously, you're not going to necessarily go and buy another bike. That is your bike. And so people like Halfords will have seen this huge uplift in sales, but actually go rolling forward, probably much less so, which is where the closures are coming in.
Yeah, it's a considered purchase, isn't it? And a non-repeat purchase almost. So, yeah, difficult times for plenty of people. I think we're seeing people in sale again, certainly young fashion. There's a whole season that's almost gone to the wilderness. And there were clearly all those reports early in lockdown of certainly fashion just cancelling orders. So don't want that season, not paying for it. And there's this ongoing debate around the whole rent piece, not something we get involved in as an organisation, but kind of clearly read the media of people wanting more transparency around rent and rates. And clearly there's pushbacks from some of the bigger companies. I think Sports Direct were in the press about pushing back of not paying rent or paying it late. So again, that must put real pressure on some of the organisations you work with from a shopping centre point of view into being probably a prime example of where it clearly is a struggle for those organisations that are struggling, that then are trying to pass that struggle to the landlords.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, for retailers, there is simply no meat on the bone. They can't afford to pay rent whilst they're not trading. They don't have the capital reserves to do it. And as you say, it gets passed back to the landlord. Fortunately for property, it is more of a long-term play. There is this natural difference in timeline between retail operations, retail sales and property. Retail sales is very immediate, very short term in terms of timeline. Property is much more long term. And that actually has been some of the issue around the lack of collaboration between retailers and property owners, but there has to be more of that. And it's interesting around the turnover rent piece that you talk about, because that was actually, I'm old enough to remember when that was last tried back in the 90s. That was brought over from the States and hailed as the new structure for property. And for a while, it started to work quite well, but ultimately retailers and property owners found it difficult to collaborate on actually information. Retailers felt quite exposed in terms of releasing their sales data to landlords. So it didn't really work structurally as as a model. So it will be interesting to see whether it works going forward. I think actually one of the key issues for retailers is rates, and it's long talked about. But there is some flexibility around the rental piece. Landlords are willing to talk to retailers and try and find an accommodation that helps to work for both of them. But rates, there is no accommodation. You either pay your rates or you don't occupy. And for a lot of retailers, that is what makes or breaks them. And that rate, I mean, we've had a rate holiday, but that is now ending. And so they're going to have to start paying rates. And it is quite onerous in a large number of places. So that is really going to be quite daunting for a lot of retailers moving forward.
So that kind of gets us into online versus bricks and mortar then. So if I can take the same money without the same property costs, so rent and rates, actually it probably puts me as a business in a better position. From a customer, do you think those trends are going to continue? Clearly, we were all pretty much forced to shop online other than groceries during lockdown. I mean, the classic examples, my mum had never used an iPad before lockdown. Now, all of a sudden, she's ordering shopping from Sainsbury's online merrily, doing a click and collect order for shopping, which in fairness, I've never done. So there's a whole generation of people all of a sudden that have had this world of, actually, I can sit here and browse and don't have to go out and I can get it delivered and I can try stuff on. That whole stuff that the younger generations are used to, that have had their eyes open to this different way of shopping. So have you got any kind of views on where you think it's going to go? We're going to continue to grow online massively? Is it going to plateau? At some point, will it implode?
Yeah, well, let me give you some of the stats around it. So at the end of 2019, online spending represented about 19% of total retail sales. And it had been growing every year since 2008. We started in 2008 at 4.9% and finished at 19.1% at the end of 2019. But over that decade, the rate of increase has been diminishing. So, that's inevitable. As a market becomes more mature, so it grows less quickly. In May 2020, online represented 32.8% of retail spending. And actually, that 32.8% exceeded the forecast provided by the Centre of Retail Research for online for 2028. So we've seen a huge uplift in online spending over just 3 months of 2020. Now, of course, as you say, Simon, that's inevitable because we couldn't buy anything other than a food store for much of the lockdown. So we had to shop online. But retailers are still finding that despite that increase, it doesn't make up for the lack of store sales. Store sales still account for the majority of many retailers' sales. And without stores, while seeing big increases in their online sales, are below where they were last year quite significantly. Now, that's not true of every retailer. I know a cycle store actually, and one of our clients who's done fabulously well, but they had a very strong online proposition beforehand, and they're a destination retailer. So it really does depend on how strong the retailer's online proposition is at the start of the process, as to how successful they're going to be. If they have a weaker online proposition or no online proposition, they're going to have to build one, and that isn't a cheap thing to do. So whilst they may not invest in stores, actually having to invest in online is a huge, huge capital expenditure piece. So these guys are not, they can't not invest. So there will come a choice for them whether they keep stores open and or invest in online. And at the moment, retailers just don't know which way it's going to go. We don't know whether this 32.8% is going to stay at 32.8% or thereabouts, or people, once they have the opportunity and feel a little bit safer, will revert back into store buying. And that 32 will drop back down into the 20s, for example. At the moment, we have no evidence.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting piece in my mind that might come out of this, and I think pre-lockdown we started to see some of it. So there seem lots more random, and in my mind random, what I'd call collaborations. So a car showroom going in a next store, for example. Now, you wouldn't necessarily put those two worlds together, but then when you start to look at the business metrics of it, that store was probably overspaced. So there's a benefit to that company to have less space. And actually, from a car manufacturer, people don't really like car showrooms because they know they're going to be sold to. So if you put it in a different environment and you've got more footfall, the probability is you sell more cars. So do you think we're going to see more I'll call it random collaborations, or collaborations of verticals that you'd never have thought would go together to tackle some of that space, rent, rate, footfall, getting people in problem?
I think we're definitely seeing that. We've seen this for a number of years, actually. I mean, I think the first one of these was when we had coffee shops inside bookshops. At the time, It was just unheard of, but it was considered to be revolutionary. Now it's completely par for the course. And, we would almost expect a coffee shop inside a large bookstore. But, and as you say, a lot of stores are overspaced, a lot of the fashion stores particularly, and it makes absolute sense to use that space most effectively. We know Next has now become a click and collect post for Amazon. They're starting to expand their brands. It's all about utilising that space more effectively, but essentially it's downsizing retail, really. It's just concentrating it more and making more of the space that they're currently paying for. But you're right, it's about making that experience a little bit more varied for people. So if you go into a Next store, you wouldn't envisage there being a car showroom within it, but actually it's quite an interesting dynamic. And if you're going as a family, it might occupy the husband a little bit while the ladies of the family shop. So that will happen more and more, but of course it's a slow process. It's not overnight. And a lot of our stores around the UK, particularly in high streets, are not really suited to that collaboration because they're not very big. So it's going to be quite challenging. It will happen in certain places, but it won't be universal because there isn't the configuration and the size to do it. So I think we will see closures. We're actually we carry out a quarterly vacancy rate survey at Springboard, and we didn't carry it out in April. But we are carrying out this month in July, and so it'll be very interesting to see whether the vacancy rate has actually gone up. And what we term a vacant store is one that isn't closed. So if it's occupied by a retailer but they're simply not trading at the current time, that's still an occupied unit. To be vacant, it has to have no tenant. So that will be very interesting to see whether the vacancy rate has gone up, and if it has, by how much.
Yeah, and I think there'll be a long tail to that. As I say, in my mind, Christmas will be really, really critical, and we'll talk about that in a second, for lots of people, potentially make or break. I think furlough tailing off and then the percentage dropping there'll be another spike, unfortunately, because going down to, I think it's 60%, will be a challenge for some people to live off, and a challenge for some organisations to bring people back to pay that 100% cost in effect. And Then there's this bonus, isn't there, at the end of January? If organisations have furloughed people and they're still employed, they get a bonus. And unfortunately, I think at the start of Feb, once that's been paid again, there's potential for another spike. So I don't think we're anywhere near out of the woods. I think in some respects, we're hopefully at the tail of the virus pandemic, but actually at the start of another one in terms of unemployment, certainly in retail and hospitality, which will be really interesting to see how it pans out, and hopefully less severe than people predict. So Christmas, I think, is going to be critical. I'm not really sure in my mind how it's going to pan out from people going into shops and buying stuff, or where that's going to work. But normally before that, we have Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Do you think that's still on the cards for this year, or it's going to be more Cyber Weekend or Cyber Week than Black Friday, or are people going to go big for footfall into stores?
Black Friday's always been an interesting one. It's sort of morphed over the years. When we started it in our bricks and mortar stores, and actually that's how it is in the States. And of course, we had a lot of furore around queues and chaos, and we took it online. And it was successful last year, partially because it was actually in December, but it's bringing Christmas forward. But Cyber Monday really is a non-entity. It doesn't really show any great fillip in spend or activity particularly. But it does tend to be a sort of a cyber week, as you say. There's a pre-Black Friday, a Black Friday, a post-Black Friday, and that tends to last at least 7 days. And I mean, in general terms, what it does is bring forward spend from Christmas. So people tend to buy the Christmas presents that they're worried they won't be able to get hold of early, particularly tech product. Christmas this year is going to be a really tough trading environment. As you said, the furlough scheme's ending, unemployment will kick in. Retail sales so far, and unless something changes, haven't been very good. They were strong if you include online, but actually a lot of the purchases made online that made them strong were one-off purchases for people working at home. So tech products, office equipment, they're not going to be rebuying those now because that was all about setting themselves up to work at home. Rolling forward to Christmas, it's going to be a very tough trading environment. And so if Black Friday does occur in the same way it has occurred in previous years, it will just simply bring forward spend that would be otherwise directed at Christmas. What I do think is actually the advantage for retail destinations and bricks and mortar stores is that Christmas is a touchy-feely time. It's all about going out and experience the sparkle and the tinsel and the music, and you can't do that sitting at home on your own with a computer. And I think that will draw people out from their homes. What there is a risk of is that destinations rail back on Christmas festivities, activities, marketing and promotions to cut budget, and then that reduces footfall. Yes, they need to be mindful of what's happening in terms of vacancy rates and rent from tenants, but they need to be doing all they can to draw people out into destinations, because actually we're social beings and Christmas is one time of the year that we want to experience that big time. So it gives us the opportunity to give our bricks and mortar destinations and the stores within them a bit of a lift.
I'm sure there'll be a Zoom Christmas party somewhere.
Oh, absolutely.
I can see the backgrounds being hot property already of Santa going past or whatever. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And again, for hospitality, if you think about their peaks across the year, Christmas party bookings, probably in the next couple of months, people would be potentially making them to get in. You've got that whole run really through December where certainly in big cities you've got parties every night that people are having in various organisations. So again, it'd be interesting to see where we are, what that looks like, because I suspect if that volume isn't there, then it could be pretty scary for quite a lot of organisations.
Absolutely. The Christmas party season is important on so many levels, certainly for hospitality. It's a big part of their budget and their revenue generation. And as you say, if it doesn't happen, they've got a big hole. And there will be some venues that are more suited to social distancing and that are happening than others. But also retail, if we're not going to Christmas parties, we won't be buying party wear because there's no point. So it's going to roll forward. The impact of that will roll forward through to fashion and also to perfume and to makeup and to travel. So it has an impact on so many levels.
You almost can't break the cycle, can you?
No.
If one bit doesn't work, then it has a material effect on all the other component parts of it. So yeah, if travel's not working, people aren't coming and going. Therefore, that whole industry and organisations like WH Smith who have a big reliance on that part, and SSP and Compass who work in those big transport hubs start to feel the pinch, and that just has a knock-on effect to everybody. So, we could speculate about what happens next year and the year after, but I think what this year's told us is you can't really look too far forward because there's just so much uncertainty around the corner and things that you'd never have predicted. I think the one thing we know, it's probably going to be tough. There's probably more challenges along the way and the water's still going to be choppy. But I think as consumers, we all, certainly in this country, we're a nation of shopkeepers. Somebody once described it, and I don't think that's a derogatory thing. I've been one and love doing that job. So hopefully we can support all those organisations, and if we're allowed to, certainly put some of that money back into the economy with visiting the high street, thinking about when we're going to buy online, if that can wait till we're next out. Because there is something magical about being in a shop. Sometimes those shops might not make it easy for us to do that, but I think you used the word theatre before. Theatre retail magic is and has been coined probably for the last 3 or 4 years about how you make a differential experience. I suspect it's going to be more important than ever. And the smarter organisations might not actually be too worried about where the sales come from if they can generate more through the experience you get when you're in the bricks and mortar part of their business. So it's back to that whole breaking down the silos of multi-channel and being truly omni-channel, I think.
Absolutely. And I think it will come down to some little tweaks and improvements and subtle initiatives by retailers. So, for example, having tablets in the store that you can order online once you're in the store. So you don't actually have to buy it from the store. So you don't have to pick up the product and go and pay for it. You can actually just go into the tablet and order it online. And I know that's been tried by Marks and Spencer in the past. It wasn't hugely successful, but actually it could be, and tablets can be easily wiped down and disinfected. So it would sit well with COVID safety, whilst it also enables you to go into the store and see things and experience the store itself. But also even just having, lots of clear guidance around, this is our website, click on this link, this is the page you go to for this product. Make sure that people can buy easily on whatever channel they want to buy from. But I think in the short term, what everyone needs to be doing, what retailers and destination owners need to be doing, is communicating to shoppers that they are doing what they need to do to keep them safe. So people aren't feeling confident at the moment. There's been recent research saying that the reason people aren't going shopping is not because they're so wedded to online, but it's more about they're worried about COVID still. So what it falls to the destinations and the stores to say, we appreciate your concerns. What we're doing is this, and this. Come to us. And at Springboard, actually, we've created a service called Occupancy Alert, which tracks occupancy. So that's people coming in versus people leaving places live in real time. So anyone who manages a store or a shopping centre can identify exactly at any point in time how many people are there. They will have set their maximum threshold, so they know the difference. So they know they're in control. But more importantly, it delivers data live, so which they can then share with customers. So they can say to customers, actually, come along now, it's quiet. Make it known to customers they're doing this, promote it through social channels, through their websites, put it on digital signage, make sure people know that they're being looked after. Then they'll start to feel more confident, and the confidence will translate through into visits. And it's all about communications at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that whole cost of capacity, let's call it, so monitoring people in and out, is something that people have had to bear for the short term, but isn't sustainable long term, is in having somebody stood there for every trading hour counting the number of people in and out just can't be a sensible way or a productive way of doing it going forward. Bearing in mind that you've got to manage the safety implications, haven't you?
Absolutely. I mean, the service that we provide is an automated service. You don't have to have anyone on the door. You can have a tablet that sits in the doorway on the window saying, please enter and please wait. So when they're within the threshold, it allows people through and it asks them to wait when they're not. That frees up 2 members of staff straight away who can be engaging with customers, who can be refilling shelves, who can be making the store nice, who can be making that shopping environment and that experience what shoppers want to see. Because I think part of the problem with queuing, and that's not the only reason by far that people aren't going back to stores, is that actually it brings into sharp focus the quality of the experience once you're in. If you're standing in a queue for 10 minutes to get into a store and then you get in the store, your judgment on that store is even more harsh than perhaps it would have been if you just wandered through the door. Your expectation is greater. So it's up to the retailer to deliver on that. You don't want to queue for 10 minutes, walk into the store and find they haven't got what you want. So everything has to be stocked. The shelves have to be ready, has to look attractive. It has to be legible so you can find your way around the store. That's also important. And you can't do that if you've got people standing on the doors controlling how many people walk through.
Yeah, I agree. And I know we touched on omni-channel, multi-channel before. I think, again, the smart retailers will be those ones that break down the silos in a store colleague way. Because if you come and see me and I talk to you and then you go away and buy that online, actually I've done all the work but felt none of the benefit because my store's not seen the sales. Therefore, I might not hit my sales bonus. Therefore, I might not get sales budget. Therefore, I might not get my bonus, etc., etc. So those really smart retailers that are almost saying, you know what, it's all wooden dollars to a degree, as long as it comes into our brand bucket and maybe it was bought within your postcode or geography, we're not really bothered whether it was in the store or online because both will have influenced each other. Whatever it's an internal competition between my store budget and sales versus the same company's online sales in the local geography, you're almost competing against yourself, which to me, I can understand why it's happened because retail stores have always had budgets and targets, and that's what you kind of measured and managed to. But I think it's going beyond that now, and the smarter ones are really trying to work that through.
Absolutely. And it's about being imaginative around how you target your staff. You know, what do you want? You want loyal customers who are satisfied with your brand. And as you say, Simon, it doesn't really matter if they buy it online or in store. You know, either one could have influenced the purchase. You could have gone online, seen what you want, and thought, well, if I can get it in store, I'm going out anyway, I'll have a look and take a trip around and buy it in store. Vice versa, they may have seen it in store, don't want to carry it home, go home and order it online. They may order it online because it's not in the store, because it's sold out, but the store will have helped that purchase and online will have helped the store. And you're right, it needs to be brought together in a true omnichannel way. And the associates or the team members need to see the benefit of that. And actually, if the brand does well as a whole, that doesn't matter where it comes from, as you say.
Yeah, in future times, I think that might be more important in terms of brand messaging for retailers and pulling it together than individual store budgets. And that's important, and it's all got to be profitable and work, but actually one has a massive impact on the other. And I know those areas where a retail outlet will shut, they do see a rise in online for that geography, but it doesn't cover all the lost sales, if that makes sense. So they've got to be careful that their span of estate doesn't leave them big pockets where they're truly just relying on online sales, because I suspect some of them, those sales then defer to another brand where there is a physical location.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. If you're in a shopping centre and you're going to one retailer and they don't have what you want, you might try another retailer who sells similar products and buy it from there. So as close as they can bring those two channels together, the better, and break down barriers. Anything that inhibits a sale has got to be removed or lessened, and people just encouraged to buy. And that means being imaginative as to how you bonus your staff.
Yeah, I look forward to hopefully hearing from some of our clients and your clients and other people we meet along the way some creative stories and journeys around that one, because it's something that people have looked at and evolved, but I think it has been an evolution. I think we're at the point now where there needs to be some real revolution of joining all that together. Like I say, people not being fearful that they're ordering it through an iPad or a tablet in the store because the store doesn't get the sale. That shouldn't be a part in a colleague's mind of what happens. It should be that bigger picture of we've retained that sale as a company. Hopefully we'll see some real breakthroughs in that area over the coming months and certainly within the next 12 months. So, Diane, it's been a fascinating chat. I mean, we could go on and talk about all sorts of things. We've not even touched on department stores or other things that are hot topics at the moment. But if people want to find out more from you, Springboard, have a look at the tech you talked about, where's the best place for them to find you?
Our website address is spring-board.info. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. So there are quite a few Springboards around, but our email address is spring-board.info. So get in touch. We'd love to hear from everyone. Cool.
And I'll put your LinkedIn profile on when this goes out so people can just click the link and connect. So hopefully you'll get some interesting conversations by way of the chat we've had today. So final question from me. Everybody that comes on gets the same one. What's the best bit of business advice that you've ever been given?
People buy from people they like. So it's all about client and customer relationships. It's got to be. And that's really been the essence of what Springboard's about, but it's been the essence I've lived through in my career, and it's never failed me yet.
Excellent. No, I totally agree with that. And having seen and sat through many software demonstrations in my Boots world and Rethink world, sometimes products are very similar. Actually, what is memorable are the people that really understood your mission, what you're about, and resonated with you. The people talk about the people. The software becomes I expect it to work, and of course it should do that. So no, I absolutely get that, and love that one. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So thanks for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you as always. Take care and look after yourself.
And you, Simon. Stay safe.